A woman came out of the land that was dry from time, where dunes hide memories that have been buried, and the sky seems to watch over everything in silence. Not many people know her name, and even fewer know how important she is. But it was she who stopped the Savior of Israel from dying by making a brave move that was written about in the holy books. What was she, and why did no one remember her story? How did a woman from another country save a guy that God had chosen from being killed? Why was the story of that moment so hard to figure out? The answer lies in being smart, taking exact action, and realizing that some choices affect a lot of people's lives, even when they're not well known. That's exactly what Zipporah, Moses' wife, stands for, the effect of faith that can't be seen and doesn't need praise. Back in her home country, Zipporah learned to respect custom and the holy before she married Moses. People from Midian, her home country, were related to Midian, Abraham's son, with Keturah, his second wife. This information from Genesis 25 shows that the Midianites were related to Abraham, even though they lived a long way away. But over the years, they formed their own character, different from the Israelites in both faith and practices. The Midian group was made up of nomad farmers who were used to living in the dry areas between Arabia and southern Canaan. They were able to stay alive by swapping goods with other groups and taking care of animals. Their way of life was simple, but not stupid. They looked up to their religious leaders. Jethro, Zipporah's father, stood out because he was wise and served as a priest in his country. In this clan and male-dominated society, women's roles were often hidden from history, but they were very important to the way families worked. As a child, Zipporah was steeped in religious practices. Her father was a priest, and she was exposed to the ideals of her faith. Her surroundings gave her a strong spiritual awareness and a practical sense that would be very useful in the future. Even though her speech isn't heard very often in the Bible, her acts at the right time show an unusual level of clarity, authority, and readiness. Many things in ancient Semitic society were symbolic, but wells were one of the most important ones. In places where water was scarce, wells were more than just places to get food and water. They were community hubs where people could meet, talk, make decisions, and often have great experiences. Several Bible stories use these places to show where important events happened. In Genesis 24, Abraham's helper finds Rebekah at the well. This marks the start of Isaac's family tree. In Genesis 29, Jacob meets Rachel at a different well. This is one of the most exciting stories in the Bible. It was the same with Moses. After killing an Egyptian, he left Egypt and went to Midian, where he saw 7 sisters being bothered by farmers as they tried to get water. He steps in and helps them, and Jethro takes him in because of it. Because of this first act of defense, he and Zipporah make a bond that will grow into something much stronger than a marriage. There were events and goals that led to their union. Moses wasn't just a runaway. He had 2 different identities. He was born in Israel and raised as an Egyptian prince. But now he was a stranger with nowhere to go. Zipporah made him feel welcome in her home and in her life. The desert woman came to spend her days with a man who was haunted by a heavy past and would have to carry an even bigger load. Years went by. A visit from God broke up the peace of Midian. God spoke to Moses through a bush that was on fire but didn't catch on fire. He knew he had to go back to Egypt and free his people from slavery. After this, Moses leaves with his wife and children. He is motivated, but he is still getting used to carrying this new load. One of the strangest stories in the Bible happens at that very moment, on the way back to Egypt. The text says that the Lord tried to kill Moses in Exodus 4:24-26. Why? The writing doesn't give a full explanation, which makes things even more mysterious. But Moses is not the one who does anything. The tragedy is stopped by Zipporah. She knows her son is in danger and knows what the real problem is, so she circumcises him right away. Something that seemed impossible to undo is undone by this act. The hearing is not held. The touch is both symbolic and physical. It's the blood of the promise, which is what God and Abraham agreed to, and it strengthens the bond that was in danger. It was known to Zipporah. She knew that Moses couldn't be a leader if he didn't follow God's rules to the letter. She knew that disobeying would kill her, even if she only forgot to do something. And most of all, she knew that she had to do something at that very moment. She says mean things like, "You're a bloody husband to me." But those words aren't rude. They're a sign of friendship. They tell us that if we want to walk with God, we have to pay with blood, sacrifice, and duty. And she, not he, made sure that the plan to save everyone would go forward. Pretty soon after, Moses sends Zipporah and her kids back to Midian, maybe to keep them safe from the risks of the mission in Egypt. She isn't seen for a while, but she comes back in a quiet way in Exodus 18, when Jethro takes his daughter and grandkids back to the Israelite camp in the desert. There isn't a big event or public praise. She is still alive, sitting still next to the man she saved because she was brave. Zipporah's story is one of those that is hidden between the lines but supports the rest of the Bible's story. The freed slave might not have made it to Egypt without her. Without her help, Moses would have died because someone should have done something earlier and not done it. Her move was clear and easy, but it meant a lot. We learn from her that spiritual leadership doesn't always come from loud wonders or pulpits. It sometimes lives in simple tents, in making quick choices, and in steady hands that do what needs to be done. When you have real faith, you do something before the worst happens, even if no one is looking. Let's move on. If this story touched you, please click the bell, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Today, we bring to light the words of the Bible's people who have been lost. You are a part of it. Lastly, if you want to help this project, please leave a thank you. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. Let's keep going on our trip today. As time went on, Moses stopped being just the man who was saved from the water. The rooms of the Egyptian palace taught him discipline, politics, and science, but they didn't help him calm down. He felt nervous all the time. When he looked into the eyes of the Hebrew slaves, he felt uneasy all the time. He wasn't like Egypt's other kids. Even though he had nice clothes and other perks, the pain of his people did not make his soul at peace. This split inside him followed him around like a shadow. Something in him wouldn't let him ignore wrongdoing. What had been just a bothersome thing became useful one day. When Moses saw an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew, he became very angry right away. The need for fairness was stronger than common sense. He killed the person who was attacking him and tried to hide the body in the sand. He may have seen this action as a sign, a quiet protest against being stifled. That act, however, left ripples that went beyond what he meant. The next day, Moses went back to his people with a kind of false hope. He might have been hoping to be noticed, or that his behavior would make people trust him. Instead, he found anger. As he tried to break up the fight between two Hebrews, he heard one of them say something that chilled him to the bone. "Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" The charge was more than just a claim. It was a word. He was no longer respected by either the Egyptians or the Hebrews after the secret was made public. When the king found out what had happened, he was very angry. He could not stand the thought of betraying someone who had grown up in his home, learned his values, and been shaped like a son. Moses was no longer wanted. They were after him, those after him. So the man who had lived in style learned about life in the desert. He left behind ease, power, and what seemed like security. He was now only carrying the weight of guilt and the feeling that he didn't belong anywhere. He got away and ended up in a place he didn't know, Midian. The dry land there wasn't very different from what he knew, but the weather was different. In that place, Moses wasn't a king or a killer. He was an unknown person who was looking for purpose and putting himself back together. He didn't know what he was doing, but his fate was about to meet that of a woman who didn't know she would change history. A new wrong was seen by Moses near a well, which was a place where many choices were made and many new people met. When 7 women tried to water their father's sheep, the caretakers pushed them away, using fear to enforce their control. The scene made Moses feel the same way he did when he was in Egypt. He didn't want to put up with abuse. He did something without knowing these people. He stood up for them, talked to the herders, and made sure they could finish their job. The act was not done for personal gain, but because of strong belief. The 7 women were the daughters of Jethro, who was the leader of Midian and a man that his people looked up to. This group had Zipporah in it. There are no records of the words that were said at that time, but deeds and outcomes are linked in a quiet way. Jethro was shocked when they got home earlier than usual. He asked, "How did you get back so quickly today?" When Jethro heard about the man who had helped them, he didn't think twice. He asked for him. The act of kindness started a new part of Moses' life. Zipporah made him feel welcome and gave him a place to stay. Over time, he won her heart. He was now going to be with the woman he had met when she was being wronged. The reason they got married wasn't because of politics or social norms. It happened after a meeting marked by fairness, bravery, and giving and taking. Zipporah did more than just watch. She had deep roots because she was raised by a wise man and could tell when the holy interacted with the everyday. Over the years, Moses left behind a picture of a runaway slave. He joined this new land. As a caretaker for Jethro, he took care of sheep and enjoyed the ease of life, which was very different from what he had known in Egypt. As soon as his kids were born, he felt at peace in a way he had never felt before. But even though it was peaceful, God's call was getting closer. The desert was more than just a place for him. It was a get-ready. Moses learned to be humble every day so he could become a leader. His anger turned into knowledge and his bravado into insight. And it was there that something strange happened. There was fire in a bush, but it didn't go out. That sight interested him. That's when he heard a voice that would change everything, the Lord calling him by name. It was clear that God wanted Moses to go back to Egypt and free the Hebrews from slavery. But the order did not come with any promises of ease. To get it, you had to trust them completely. Moses was unsure. He doubted his skills, his voice, and his power. God told him, "I will be with you, though. That's enough for now." Moses left with his family. The trip back was more than just a walk. It was emotional, spiritual, and a sign of something. He felt it was his duty to face the power that had made him and destroy the framework that kept it going. Still, something was still not done. God had made a long-standing demand that his son be circumcised, but it had not yet been done. At that very moment, history changed in a big way again. During the trip, when they stopped to rest, God spoke to Moses. The Bible says, "The Lord found him and tried to kill him." This is both a clear and a vague statement. Zipporah is the only one who knows how important this is. She cuts her son's belly button with a sharp stone, then throws the foreskin at Moses' feet and says, "You are a bloody husband to me." Zipporah didn't think twice. She did it. She knew that Moses could not speak for the God of Israel in front of Egypt if he didn't fully follow the promise he made with Abraham. She shows up again as the link between absence and rescue. At that time, she had more spiritual insight than Moses himself. Her attitude also saved the life of the man who was picked to free a whole country. Soon after that, Moses sent his wife and kids back to Midian. They would see each other again after crossing the Red Sea, when Jethro brought them back to Moses. Zipporah doesn't say anything else in the Bible story, but the fact that she was there at the most important times has left a lasting impact. The story of Zipporah and Moses is full of chance meetings, quick choices, and acts that don't follow the rules of time. He was getting better at hearing God's words, but she already knew when to act. He was in charge of the task, and she was there to help him make decisions. The two went well together, not in words, but in spirit. Two cultures and worlds came together there, in the sands of flight and return to Egypt. In the middle of it all, an unseen but unbreakable link formed that would keep a whole group of people free. Moses learned how to be a leader. Zipporah taught people to be good. They wrote an important chapter in the history of salvation together. Moses' arrival at Jethro's house in Midian was not only a turning point in his life as a runaway slave, but it was also the start of a friendship that would go beyond religious and cultural differences. When the priest's girls came home earlier than normal, their dad didn't understand. In addition to being careful, Jethro was also very smart. This change in habit meant that something wasn't right. When he heard them say that a foreign Egyptian had helped them water the sheep and protect them from the farmers, he was surprised and replied right away. He told someone to bring the man right away to him. This act of kindness wasn't limited to providing a place to stay temporarily. It marked the start of a deep merger. In Moses, Jethro saw someone important, not only because he was brave in protecting his girls, but also because he acted with honor. In a society where honor was very important, Moses' actions showed that he was honest and caring, which are not always seen in leaders. Living together between Moses and the people of Midian came easily. The person who used to be a stranger became one of them. It is written in Exodus 2:21-22 that Moses agreed to stay there and married Zipporah. The act wasn't just a family marriage, it was a promise between worlds. By going with Zipporah, Moses not only married a woman, but he also joined the family of a priest and gave himself over to the leadership of a new society that was different from both Egypt and Israel. In the past, marriage meant a lot of different things. It was a way to strengthen bonds, bring families together, keep family histories alive, and bring people together in communities. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice for Jethro to give Moses his daughter. It was a choice about strategy, religion, and society. It was clear that Moses took this new situation very seriously when he agreed to be a part of this union. He wasn't just the lost prince or the Hebrew having an identity problem anymore. He was now a part of something bigger, a new group of people he knew. It's not just for show that Zipporah shows up in this story. Instead, she stands out as a strong and important figure. Because she was the daughter of a priest, she was treated with care and got a great religious and cultural education. Being raised in a place where the holy was normal, she knew how to spot the signs of the divine and make good decisions. Years later, when Moses' life was in danger, this teaching would show up in a powerful way. Moses worked as a shepherd while he was in Midian. He learned how to take care of the land and animals, lead groups of sheep, and find his way through deserts. He learned to be patient, listen well, and be strong through this training, all of which would be very important in his future purpose. And Zipporah went through the same things, had the same duties, and faced the same problems. Not only did they love each other, but they also lived together every day, helped each other out, and shared a faith. God showed himself to Moses on Mount Horeb through a bush that burned but did not go out. Moses was given clear instructions. He had to go back to Egypt and free the Hebrew people from slavery. At first, Moses didn't want to fight with God, but he did. It made him feel bad, but the call could not be ignored. So he set out on the trip back with his wife and kids, having both a goal and an unresolved problem. This is the point in the story where things get the most strange and fierce. In Exodus 4:24-26, there is a short section that has a lot of meaning in terms of religion and symbols. During the trip, when they stop to rest, God talks to him. The text says it straight out, the Lord tried to kill him. Even though it's not discussed in depth, the reason has to do with Moses not circumcising his son, which was an important part of the promise that Abraham made. In Genesis 17, it was set up that circumcision was the obvious sign of the promise God made with his children. It was more than just a rite. It stood for loyalty, obedience, and joining the endless union. Ignoring this sign would be to question the purity of one's calling. And Moses, who was chosen to set a people free, had not yet done this simple thing with his own son. Right when things were getting really tense, Zipporah stood up. She didn't think twice. She knew, even though she didn't say it, that her husband's life was in danger and that the mistake had to be fixed right away. By herself, she cut the baby's thigh with a sharp flintstone. It was a terrible thing to do, but it had to be done. She not only stepped in physically, but she also made the cause spiritually valid again. In Zipporah's case, her behavior is not just a formality. She knows what is at stake, not only Moses' life, but also God's plan for the future. She says something very important as she touches Moses' feet with the blood of the circumcision. "You are a bloody husband to me." Scholars are still arguing about these words, but they still strike a chord as a warning of how much it costs to obey, how much the call costs, and how important the covenant is. There is no doubt that this episode shows how deeply spiritual Zipporah is. Even though she wasn't born in Israel, she knows and respects the bond so much that she steps up to protect it at a very important time. While these traits aren't always found in minor characters in the Bible, they make her a key player in God's plan because of how quickly, firmly, and bravely she acts. Right then, Moses makes the choice to send Zipporah and her kids back to Midian. He may have done this to keep his family safe, or because he knew the task in Egypt would be too dangerous for them. Even though the Bible doesn't say why, the separation is clear for a short time. Later in Exodus 18, Jethro brings Zipporah and her children back to Moses in the desert. This is after Moses did great things before Pharaoh and freed the people. Their return is quiet. There isn't a party or big announcement. However, the fact that Zipporah is back with Moses shows that their relationship stayed strong. She was a way to save people before the mission started, and now she is back with her husband at the top of his leadership game. The character of Zipporah stays out of sight for the rest of the story, but her effect had already been recorded for sure. That woman knew when to do something. Those who knew what was holy. Which person, even though they were not Israelites, was more devoted to the bond than the chosen leader? And it is this paradox that shows how great she is. Not only did her marriage to Moses change her life, it also changed the history of Israel. People at the well, the woman, the priest's daughter, the brave mother, and the wife who stands between death and duty. Some women in the Bible are able to make a difference when no one else sees the danger. Zipporah is one of those women. The attention didn't have to be necessary for her. What she did, not what she said, was what she contributed. She not only saved a man by taking a stone and acting, but she also kept the goal to free a country alive. When Zipporah circumcised her son, she was acting quickly, but it was also a sign that she had a deep knowledge of spiritual things. Even though she wasn't from Israel, her father was a priest in Midian and wasn't raised in the same customs as the Hebrews. She was surprisingly clear about the basic rules of the bond that God made with Abraham's people. When Moses, the man picked to talk to Pharaoh, broke a basic rule, it was his wife who stepped in and spoke up for him. That moment not only saved Moses' life, but it also changed Zipporah's place in the Bible story. She was seen as a friend and mother up until that point, but now she is a figure of spiritual guidance. Her action shows more than just bravery. It shows that she has a deep knowledge of the bond and how important it is to follow God. The phrase, blood bride, that she uses has meanings in both rituals and prophecies. Because she acts as a link between human mistake and God's kindness, she helps to restore the covenant. Zipporah was not only a wife at that time, she was also a prayer warrior. While Moses thought she did something, the fact that she understood how serious the situation was shows that her devotion to the God of Israel was not just surface level or the result of living with her husband. The fact that she grew up in a religious family and spent time with Moses, God's chosen one, gave her a strong spiritual sense. She chose not to wait because she knew what was at stake. By doing this, she shows that she is still important to the task Moses is about to start. He who freed Israel did not walk by himself. There was a woman with him who was from a different society than the other women in the Bible. She was smart and took action that made her stand out. In a society dominated by men, many women were shut down or given minor parts. Zipporah broke down that barrier, not through speeches, but through exact deeds at key times. Her message was heard. Not only does this scene mark a spiritual turning point, but it also makes the bond between Moses and Zipporah stronger. Before, their marriage brought together two different societies. Now, the blood of obedience and salvation sealed their union on a spiritual level. But this partnership would face problems and opposition, just like any other union between worlds. Years later, after the Hebrews were freed and during their long trip through the desert, there is a change in the way the family works. In Exodus 18:1-12, Moses' father-in-law Jethro comes to visit the Israelite camp. We have a lot to think about during this visit. It's not just Jethro's father who comes. He also represents a whole society that is different from the Israelites. He shows up with Zipporah and Moses' kids who were sent back to Midian at some point during the journey. People are happy to see Moses. He goes outside to meet Jethro and bows down to honor him. Then he tells Jethro stories about what God had done for the people. Even though Jethro is not from Israel, he knows how great the God of Israel is and makes sacrifices to him. Respect for each other, acceptance of differences, and a shared religion are all present at this time. This episode shows that blending different cultures can be hard, but it is possible if you are wise, humble, and focused on God's plan. For her part, Zipporah comes back in silence. People can feel her, but she doesn't stand out. However, the fact that Jethro brought her back shows that she was still important in Moses' life. She was more than just the wife of a star. She helped build leadership. Even though she is quiet, her presence in the family and on the task keeps them together. She is the one who supports, walks with, and gives witness. But some people did not think the same way about Zipporah. She had to deal with problems when she lived with the Israelites for a long time. They had strict customs and a strong sense of who they were that came from being chosen by God. Zipporah had to deal with the weight of culture rejection because she was a foreign woman. Because she was Midianite, she was a different person. And being different wasn't always welcome among a people who thought they were special and chosen. This stress is shown very strongly in the event described in Numbers 12. In that place, Moses' brothers Miriam and Aaron talk badly about him because he married a Midianite woman. Many experts think this lady is Zipporah, but there is some disagreement about who she really is. The word Cushite could mean something about her looks, like her darker skin, or it could mean where she is from. Anyway, the main thing that people didn't like about him was that he married a foreign woman. Miriam and Aaron don't just criticize married people. They question whether God only talks through Moses and question his authority. These questions show a buildup of family, spiritual, and cultural conflicts. By criticizing Moses' marriage, they are really showing that they don't like how God put their brother above them and how his choice of spouse went against what most people thought was right. It is clear from the Bible that this kind of grumbling is not okay with God. He steps in, tells the three to leave the camp, and fiercely supports Moses. He says that he talks to messengers in dreams and visions, but that he talks to Moses in real life. This divine recognition can't be questioned. And to show that she doesn't agree, Miriam gets leprosy. Aaron is in a lot of pain and begs Moses to pray for her. Moses does. It's a harsh sentence that won't last long. Miriam has to be alone for 7 days until she is clean. There are many levels to this story. It shows how racial, cultural, and spiritual problems can get mixed up with family problems. It also shows that God's people still had problems with their own prejudices, even after amazing and freeing events. And most importantly, it supports Moses's and, indirectly, Zipporah's role as valid agents of God's will, even though there were complaints within the group. For the second time, Zipporah doesn't say anything. Even though her presence is quiet, you can feel her impact. She had saved Moses before. Now that she hasn't done anything, she is still a sign of how God's plan includes different people. God is not bound by race, culture, or custom. He makes choices based on his will and gives power to those he picks, even if they are not from the usual group. The stranger, the woman of the desert, the one who brought comfort during a very tense time, was also turned down. But she didn't let that change her faith or resolve. Zipporah stands for the words that speak up without wanting to be noticed. She shows that following God can come from strange places and that a heart that is in tune with the holy can go beyond cultural differences. Her story, which is linked to Moses, is still one of the most interesting in the Bible. She was not only the liberator's friend, but also a quiet partner, a constant presence, a spiritual guide, and a link between people and God. People still think that women in the Bible were not important because of her bravery, deeds, and strength. Zipporah made a big impact on the story of redemption, even though she didn't give talks or get praise from the people. God kept her in the plan even when people said bad things about where she came from. His honor does not depend on labels or customs. He can see the heart, and Zipporah had faith, loyalty, and bravery in her heart. Miriam and Aaron's criticism wasn't just about making their family feel bad. Fear of being different came out, which is a feeling that is often hidden as religious zeal. Moses' marriage to a foreign woman whose family history was not Jewish caused a lot of pain, both personally and in terms of identity. Some saw Zipporah, the woman from another land who was the daughter of a priest in Midian, as a warning that the holy could come from places that aren't usually associated with these things. And for a group of people who believed that only God could call them, that sounded like a threat. By asking Moses why he chose to get married, Miriam and Aaron were also making a point of his personal life. In a sneaky way, they were questioning his authority as boss. No trust was shown to Moses' Midianite wife because of the lack of trust in Moses himself, whose power came from being close to God. Miriam, a prophetess, and Aaron, the high priest, felt out of place because Moses and the Lord were so close. They tried to restore balance to a power structure they no longer controlled by hitting Zipporah's roots, which were the weakest link. There is no silence from God in the face of this insult, though. He calls Moses' 3 brothers to the tent of meeting and tells them straight out what makes Moses different from all the other prophets. Some people had visions, dreams, or puzzles, but Moses heard the voice of God clearly, like a friend talking to them. This statement is not only a support of Moses' leadership, but it is also a warning against pride that looks like zeal. God says that to treat Moses badly is to treat the Lord badly as well. For Zipporah, this divine action has a huge meaning, even though she is not physically there. Her position, which was often called into question because she was a foreign woman, is silently but strongly backed up for the first time. By strongly supporting Moses, God also approves of his decisions, such as his marriage to a woman from another country. People used to criticize Zipporah in a roundabout way, but now she was an important part of God's plan. However, God's punishment wasn't just words. Miriam is punished with leprosy, a disease that meant more than just being sick and meant being left out of social and religious activities. Because she wasn't ritually clean, she had to stay outside the camp for 7 days. This divide represents the split from the community and the loneliness of people who let bias cross the lines of faith and respect. There is a terrible irony in the picture of Miriam with leprosy and being as white as snow. The woman who had said bad things about someone else for being different looked like the exact opposite of what she said: alone, noticed, and fragile. She is being punished, but it is more than that. It is a clear lesson for everyone in Israel. God does not allow people to be left out because of their background, race, or country. In Egypt, the people who were being mistreated could not turn around and hurt other people in their own camp. Moses' prayer for his sister shows that he still has a caring heart, even though he was hurt by the charge. He begs God to heal Miriam, and heaven hears his prayer, but the 7 days of being banned are still in effect. There must be an end to the lesson. People are waiting. Nobody can move on until Miriam is fixed. This moment of silence makes what happened even more important and gives everyone a chance to think about it as a group. Zipporah, on the other hand, doesn't say anything. But it's the sound of someone who knows their place. She didn't have to defend herself or fight. God's answer had already said what she needed to hear. And for her, that quiet approval was stronger than any voice. It was important to keep her honor. Her position was safe. Even though she wasn't born in Israel, she was accepted as the real wife of the person who freed Israel. But that's not where the story ends. To live together with people from other countries, you need more than just understanding. It needs constant resilience. Zipporah kept getting looks, comments, and hints of doubt. She was a woman in a group of people who hadn't learned how to deal with differences yet. Everyone watched her every move and figured out what she meant by using codes she hadn't helped write. Her husband was married to a son from another world, so she lived in between the two. The task was just as hard for Moses. He was in charge of a group of people whose eyes were not yet open to things other than their own traditions. He was not only supposed to lead the Israelites to the Promised Land, but also to teach them how to be fair, humble, and just in their daily lives. In his own tent, it all began. His loyalty to Zipporah was not only a marriage vow, but also a public statement. By staying with her as his wife, even though her family and culture put pressure on him not to, Moses showed that God's will is not limited by race. Even though their relationship was hard, it became a sign of a bigger plan, a God who picks people based on their hearts, not their family trees. Zipporah, who was the daughter of a priest in the Midianite tribe, had more spiritual insight than many other people in the camp. She kept Moses from dying, knew what the bond meant, and stood by the chosen leader even when things looked the worst. In addition, she did all of this without wanting praise or a high position. Miriam's illness, on the other hand, made Zipporah's situation stronger. People who had been whispering before could now see what would happen if they let hatred get into them. Everyone had to look at their own flaws and biases when they saw the show as a mirror. At the same time, it showed that God doesn't follow human reasoning. His kingdom is based on timeless truths, not on customs that leave people out. Still, Zipporah had a hard time. She had to deal with people who thought they were unique, but hadn't learned how to include others yet. Everything about her was always being tested, her background, her language, her traditions. But being liked wasn't what made her strong. The key was to know who she was. She wasn't defined by what other people thought of her. She was defined by the job that kept the man by her side going. She knew what her job was. She knew that she was always there, even in the background of history. One of the things that helped Moses stand was her quiet strength. Moses made every tough choice, led the people through every hard day, and dealt with every problem with them, with the help of a woman who knew what it meant to obey. Our lesson from Zipporah's story is that acceptance doesn't always happen right away, or even at all. But her story also shows us that being important doesn't depend on being well known. Often, the biggest accomplishments are held up by unseen supports. Even when being loyal made her uncomfortable, she stayed true to him. She stood by Moses even when people didn't believe he was there. She was strong in front of the God of Israel, even though she was not from Israel. Her quiet spoke louder than any words she spoke. What she did was stronger than what she said. It took more guts for her than following the rules. When Miriam was kicked out of the camp, it was like history had turned around. The person who had been critical was now going. The person who was judged stayed. For a while, the people learned that God doesn't want them to be pure in terms of race, but in terms of their heart. That the promise made with God isn't just about having children, but also about obeying Him. And that sometimes someone from outside the promised land has more faith than someone who was born under that name. People remember Zipporah as a brave, smart, and devoted woman. Her life was full of ups and downs, and also spiritual confirmations. Being with Moses wasn't a mistake. She chose to be there, and God praised that choice. The distance between Moses and his family wasn't just real. It was also spiritual, emotional, and planned. Exodus 18:2-3 says that when Zipporah and her children go back to Midian, what seems like an easy act is actually filled with pain, duty, and sacrifice. When God gave Moses the job of facing Pharaoh and saving an entire country, he knew that he could not be weak. He knew that having his wife and children with him during such a dangerous time made him even more vulnerable. He knew that the job he had been given was not only hard, but also cruel. When you fought the Egyptian kingdom, you were up against the world's most cruel government. There were real risks, like ambushes, retaliation, and the group falling apart. Every thought or feeling that took his attention away from his goal could cost thousands of innocent lives along with his own. In light of this, the choice to send Zipporah and the children back to Midian was not one of abandonment, but one of safety. Still, being apart hurt. Moses cared about his family. Born in exile, Gershom was the first child. His name meant stranger in a foreign land, which showed that he was nostalgic. The younger son's name, Eliezer, meant that God would help him in times of trouble. Both showed parts of Moses' life that were still happening. Now, those parts had to be put on hold. Even though there were wars and plagues, Zipporah would remember the quiet nights in Egypt after Zipporah left. Going back to Midian was just as hard for Zipporah. Things had changed even though she was going back to her dad's house. She was now married to a preacher, had 2 kids, and told a story that not many people understood. She lived between 2 worlds, the one of her Midianite roots, which had shaped her, and the one of how God had called Moses. This duality needed to be balanced all the time. On the one hand, she had to show that she was still a woman of faith in front of people who might not trust her. But her husband was not there, and she didn't know if he would come back or if he would be successful. She was in charge of taking care of Gershom and Eliezer. As a mother, she taught, watched over, and led her children. For the kids, it was her job to keep the memories of their home alive while also getting them ready for an unknown future. Zipporah may have known in her heart that the road Moses had taken would only lead in one direction. This freedom for the Hebrew people would not be a short event, but the start of something much bigger. And because she was always careful, she didn't say anything about it. At the same time, Moses set foot on Egyptian land again, this time with only his stick and God's call in his heart. The land that had raised him was now against him. The Hebrews, who were his blood brothers, didn't know yet if they could trust this man who had come back as a message from God. There was fear, doubt, and hope that wasn't very strong. Moses knew that there would be signs, pushback, and wonders along his way. No matter how much help he got from heaven, though, nothing could take away his quiet longing for home. Every time they fought with Pharaoh, every time a plague happened, or every time people were in pain, Moses thought of his children, Zipporah, and his temporarily destroyed home. The pain of being apart did not stop faith. Instead, it made it stronger. He was in charge of a group of people who did not yet have freedom, and his family, who had always been there for him, was far away and alone. During the times when he wasn't talking to Pharaoh, Moses may have found comfort in his thoughts of Zipporah's calm face, Gershom's laughter, and Eliezer's sound sleep. Zipporah's father, Jethro, kept a close eye on everything. With his job as a priest in Midian, he knew how important spiritual callings were. Even though he sent his daughter and grandkids back to keep them safe, he knew how much that return would cost. Jethro knew a lot, but he knew that Zipporah's silence wasn't a sign of submission, but of respect, which meant she wasn't just waiting, but had hope. So Jethro gave his daughter and grandkids safety, respect, and order without saying much. He made room for God's plan to come true, even though he was far away. Time went by. Things got worse in Egypt. Moses more and more became the voice of God's justice. The water went red, frogs swarmed the land, and locusts ate all the crops. Pharaoh's heart became harder with each new fight, but Moses kept going. God's voice led them, and they were sure that there was a people waiting to be freed, and also by feelings of nostalgia. The fact that Zipporah and the kids weren't there was a steady reminder of how he had given up life with his family to lead many people. After the 10th plague and the death of the eldest child, the king finally gave in. People quickly left Egypt with hope and bread that didn't need to be risen. It was the start of a new age and a new trip, the desert journey. Now that Moses was in charge of a whole country, he also had to deal with the pain of being apart for years. Something very strange happened at this time. Jethro chose to go find Moses in the desert with Zipporah, Gershom, and Eleazar, his children. Exodus 18 talks about a meeting that is both family and spiritual. Moses tells Jethro about what God has done. They tell him about the plagues, how the sea split, the manna, and the water that came out of the rock. He responds by making offerings and giving thanks to the God of Israel. It's a quiet deal between societies, a bridge that wasn't made by force, but by proof. The Bible only hints at the meeting with Zipporah. There aren't any long talks or detailed descriptions of hugs. But there's no need to. The Bible text is silent, but it hides the passion of a truly human moment. Looks that meet again after being apart for months or even years. A wife who gets to see her husband again. He is now the leader of a country. Children who hug their father again and see him as a prophet. Being there replaces being absent. And finally, the wait pays off. As always, Zipporah doesn't want to be the center of attention. Her appearance is proof of what she says. She comes back without asking for anything or complaining. She comes back because she knows that her place is still the same, even though she is far away. She kept her job. Her voice stayed the same. Once more, her silence says a lot. She went away, waited, and put up with a lot. And now she's back as an important part of the story. Moses' choice to spend some time away from his family for a while turned out to be a very wise one. However, it also showed how weak people are when God calls them. Even the best leaders have to deal with the costs of service. That cost gave Zipporah's story even more meaning. She not only followed Moses, but she also carried things that he couldn't at that time. She looked out for their kids, kept the faith alive, and waited without giving up. The short time they were apart did not break the tie between them. In fact, it made them trust each other even more. When they met again in the desert, the promise they had made to each other had been sealed for a long time, but no one else could see it. Moses no longer had to carry the weight of Pharaoh's shadow. The sea had opened up, and the people's feet were on dry ground. Egypt was now a faraway memory, a bad dream over, in the sands where there were tears, palm trees, and the holy silence that only freedom can bring. The cry for freedom could be heard, but there was still a hole inside Moses. It was like Zipporah and his kids were not there. It was an unseen hurt that was as deep as the scars from years of being abused. Along the path, he held a cane and walked without being touched by his kids' little hands. He led a lot of people, but he missed his wife's strong, quiet voice. He wanted to share every wonder he saw, every commotion he stopped, and every divine message he got with the people he loved the most. And even though he was the center of God's work, he still wanted to be with his family. While this was going on, Zipporah kept the faith alive in Midian. She took good care of Gershom and Eleazar with the patience of someone who knows that everything that waits will bloom if it is watered with purpose. She told her kids about the promises God had made, the signs that were with Moses, and the stories that went around the country about how amazing Egypt was. She got them ready for their meeting even though they were far apart. She was sure that they would be back soon. As always, she didn't ask why, she just trusted. Following hearing stories about what the God of Israel had done, Jethro chose to go to the desert to find his son-in-law. Not just a dad and grandpa came to visit. It was the spiritual recognition of a priest before a plan from heaven came true. He was sure that this get-together had to happen. Having learned this, he took Zipporah and his grandkids to Moses' camp. Time seemed to stop when Moses looked into his wife's eyes. No words are enough. As if it had heard that story, the desert seemed to be able to breathe easier. "Oh," Zipporah smiled. Moses came up to him, and for a short time there were no groups, no complaints from people, and no duties from God. After a trip of faith, there was only a man and a woman left together. He put his hand on his kids' faces. They were bigger. Gershom, who looked like he did when he was in Midian. Eliezer, whose eyes were as bright as his mom's. Moses felt whole again. Even though the task wasn't over yet, being with his family was like coming home after a storm. There was a moment of peace in the camp, which had been tense and divided before. It was a sign that they were meeting again at the base of the mountain where he had heard God's voice. It was the same place where the call was made and where the fire didn't reach the bush. That's where another promise was made, that faith and family will walk together. That even when following means being apart, getting back together brings twice as much hope. As she always had, Zipporah stayed by Moses' side, even when they were far apart. Even though she didn't ask for it, no one could deny how important she was. She was the one who rescued Moses when God was angry with him. She took care of the kids while the plans for freedom came together. She waited in silence because she knew that love isn't shown by being there all the time, but by being true all the time. That she told that story is a strong warning that being a leader doesn't always mean speaking up. Being steady, having faith in silence, and being wise at the right time can bring about some changes. Zipporah is a great example of a woman who doesn't want to be noticed, but holds up the story of forgiveness from the ground up. The Bible is full of male names and brave acts, but Zipporah stands out as a force that can't be erased from history. Even though there aren't many lines that clearly name her, she moves through the pages with grace. And that's exactly what makes her even more powerful. Her impact lies between the lines, at the very base, where important decisions start. Zipporah doesn't stand out for her great talks at the end of her trip. She stands out for the great things she did. Because she was brave, had faith, was strong, and was spiritually aware, she is one of the most important people in the story of freedom. Moses spent his early years outside of Egypt with her. His life was saved because of her. In the middle of a heavenly mission, it was his friendship with her that kept his humanity alive. There is no throne or personal pride at the end of this story. It ends with a get-together. She knew the wait was worth it when she held her children and saw her husband again. Zipporah stands for all women who sit in the back but are strong in their faith. And her life shows that God doesn't forget the quiet words. At the right time, he raises them up. Let us not only remember her story, but also honor it. Let her faith, which is stronger than distance, encourage you. And may her bravery in the face of bias be praised. Because Zipporah wasn't just with a savior, she was an important part of freedom, and that's where her eternal glory lies. Please share this word with someone who also needs to remember that God uses everything, even the smallest things, to carry out his plan. Leave your amen in the comments, click like on this video, and stay with us as we explore the word's secret gems. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.